Good evening. My name is Tennyson Mukuchini. I am your facilitator this evening, and welcome to part one of the proposal development sessions that we have arranged for you on the Accelerated Masters and Doctoral Support Program. As I've said, many of the sessions that we develop offer an overview of whatever the concept that we're looking at is. And we provide it in a way that allows our honor students to have, those honor students who have a research element in their programs to take part and to also benefit from this. We've also set it up so our master students can have an opportunity to learn from this, but we've also created the session in a way that affords our doctoral students the ability to walk through the proposal. Remember, essentially when people do research, the difference ultimately becomes, it plays out as the level of depth people give at different levels, the complexity of what they're studying, and of course with the doctoral students, there is the requirement that they should make this unique contribution to knowledge. But everything else in between operates on the basis of very similar principles. So this proposal development session that we are providing for you will straddle across all these different levels of expectation. We have part two that will be done tomorrow by a colleague of ours, Professor Johnston. And in that session, she will also repeat some of the things that I've touched on, but expand much more further on expectations. And one of the other things I keep saying on and on about these presentations is that you learn best if you hear about something from multiple perspectives, because then one of those perspectives will resonate with your learning style, and you will therefore be able to pick up what you need to get. But tonight, the session that you are having will be presented by me. And as per usual, a couple of administrative things that we need to observe. Firstly, on your gadget, you will have a Q&A tab that you can press onto, and please start populating your questions as early in the session as you believe you've got a question. Some of the questions may later be answered in my presentation, but I will still give them some consideration. Also, as I start the actual presentation, I am going to share with you my screen, and when I share the presentation, I will take off the camera feed, so you only have just the presentation to focus on. And that moment is coming up now. So to very quickly share with you the presentation that we have, I shall just very quickly do this. Right, okay. I suspect I trust you're able to see the presentation that I have for you now. So just for purposes of reorientation, we are going to be focusing on a guided tour of proposal development, parts 1 and 2. By guided tour, basically what I'm going to do is I've taken one of the generic proposal documents that students are expected to utilize, and I'll walk through it. I'll walk you through it and explain what the different elements in it entail, and hopefully that should guide you sufficiently. Now, just some things. Students will come back to me and say, look, the document you shared with us is different from the one the college or my specific department uses. And I can assure you one thing, the documents only differ in as far as some of the structural organization of things, but one document that says background and another that says introduction, the same requirements, the same content requirements stand. So the different designs of the document shouldn't throw you off. But what we have done, and we've tried to do this very conscientiously, is to make sure that we have as uniform a proposal document across the university as possible. So any changes that you find will be very, very minor. But as I say that, I now want to walk you through the proposal. And look, as always in my presentations, I always start with definitional clarity. And in this offering of definitional clarity, I'm basically identifying and specifying to you what a research proposal is seen to be, and from that you should be able to get quite a lot of instructions, because research is largely to do with taking principles and sustaining those principles throughout a piece of work, and that's essentially what research is about. So firstly, I offer to you one of the very commonly used definitions, which sees a research proposal as a systematically formatted and detailed statement of intent of the researcher, which presents and justifies a plan of action and shows the investigation plan. So what I am saying to you is systematically formatted. That means that every proposal has a format that has been derived or standardized for your use. So even when you write a free-flowing proposal and you write it yourself, the different subheadings that you use are all part of a pre-existing standardized format for a proposal. So if you write a proposal and you are not following a template of sorts, then you know you're not doing it the right way. So systematically formatted is the first clue that you've got. The next is a detailed statement of intent of the researcher. So we are saying that you will walk your reader through as much detail as you can about the things you intend to do as you conduct your study. That detail is important. So don't think that you should just say, I want to study this, and then mention one or two elements about what you intend to study. No, a proposal gets better by definition of how detailed your statement of intent is. The way the litmus test that people used to refer to was that they would say, you should write a proposal so well that if you give it to anyone who's competent in research, they can carry out the research without ever having to call you once. But for them to be able to do that without referring to you, they need to be clear about the detail. They also need to understand your justification. So when you think about research and you think about proposals, it's all to do with a whole set of incremental decisions that one makes. So you make a decision about which topic you'll focus on. When you decide that topic, you offer us a basis for why the topic matters and why it is important and why researching it now is more critical than any other time. Then once you've made that decision, you say, okay, out of that problem, I proceed to now clarify what I aim to do in understanding the problem and what the objectives will be. At that point, then it becomes clear that you also need to justify why the particular aim that you have, what is it that is unknown in this space that you're studying, and using that knowledge gap, as we refer to it in research, as your justification why you should study something. And then, of course, as you proceed through and you make decisions about your data collection, you make decisions about your analysis, all of those are incremental decisions that a person makes. And when they make them, they are also giving some testimony of the reasons why they do what they do. So that definition literally tells you exactly what you should do. I've also just looked at presented to you various terminologies that you may come across when people describe research proposals. Some of them some people will call them as a research outline, a synopsis of your research, a plan of your research, a research or project proposal, and sometimes people will go as far as identifying it as a thesis plan. Whatever they call it, it's literally just a blueprint of your future activities as they relate to your tentative project. And then, of course, there are preconceived frameworks. So the idea with research proposal is, if done very, very well, it offers a detailed statement of what you want to do, but there's a possibility that in real life, when you play this out, one or two things will be different from what you have stated in your proposal. But the expectation and clarity is that the proposal should be as close to a roadmap as possible. And of course, it deals with the ideas that you have, what objectives and methodologies you've chosen, what the resources that you need to complete this is, and how you intend to disseminate or share the outcomes of that study that you have. So in practical terms, it's a comprehensive overview of your intentions in completing your proposed study. It gives us a detail of the plans and all aspects of the research process as it relates to your work. So that is essentially what a proposal is. And before I get into that, I want to just share some principles with you. So no aspect of a research proposal should remain uncompleted. If you have a research proposal document and there's an element that does not relate to you, you put in not applicable. You don't leave it blank, because there's a suggestion then that somehow you didn't give it just consideration, you didn't look at it properly, and so forth, and whatever else. So you need right. You basically may not have been, if you miss out a part, it gives the appearance that you did not fully comprehend what the form was asking you to do, or you overlooked it. So anything that seems inapplicable to you, you indicate is not applicable. Secondly, when we create proposal documents, we create them for every permutation of student. So we create it for students who might have a mixed method study, but yours is just one design. We create it for people who might have 2 or 3 different types of data collection approaches, but you may only be using one data collection approach. So you will find that a substantial amount of the average proposal document tends to be to have information requirements that don't relate to you. So firstly, the first item to consider, so that's the first principle to think about. Secondly, the second element that you should be aware of is that in departments, the proposal represents the first stage of you getting ethical clearance. So depending on different departments and how they've managed things, they may actually have a proposal document as the same document that you use for ethical clearance, but it doesn't change what happens. So when you obtain ethical clearance, which is just confirmation from reviewers that your study is safe to carry out and it would not cause any harm to the populations on whom it will be carried out. So what happens in a typical world is you write a proposal. The proposal gets submitted and subjected to a first level review process, and that first level review process we refer to as the scientific review. So people just review it to assess that it meets all the scientific requirements, it follows all the scientific rules, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And then once it's completed the scientific process, you, the student, will normally get the proposal document with corrections that you must effect. Then you make those corrections. And once the scientific panel that looked at it are happy that scientifically the study is good, they will then push it on to the ethical clearance phase. Some departments will have the scientific group and the ethical proposal, the ethical clearance group, all combined in one. So when a student sees this, they believe it's gone to one space, but really your proposal goes through 2 levels of analysis. A scientific review first and foremost, then once it's received scientific clearance, it goes for ethical clearance by the departments or the college's ethical clearance committee. Now I'm just walking you through a typical ethical proposal document. Some of the things are self-explanatory: full name, title of investigator, highest academic qualification and professional qualification. All of that is necessary information that we collect in understanding who the writer of the proposal is. And then firstly, what of course is the first bit is this bit where you put in the title of your proposed study. Now, this world of titles is very, very complicated, unnecessarily so. It is actually the least problematic of things, but it tends to become the most pronounced problem because people misunderstand what the operational purpose of a title is. So my hope is that when I speak to you now, you will get it. Firstly, when you write a proposal, when you work through your study, you work with this concept of what we call a working title. A working title means it's a dynamic title. It will change over the course of time, and it may change for very different reasons. It may change because you understand your topic better and you know better words. It may change because you are now submitting your study to an area that wants your title to only be 15 words long and not whatever. So you may find yourself regularly changing it, and don't obsess too much about that. Of course, when you begin to create your proposal, you do need a title that will give your initial readers a very good sense of what you are trying to talk about. So firstly, you must say in your title, it should be short, descriptive. People will generally suggest that it should not exceed 40 words. You may go to somewhere else and they say it shouldn't exceed 15 words, but all of those rules are just individual things that different departments do. But in principle, in the world of research, there is no thing such as a word limit or whatever. What you are meant to do is to follow specific conventions, and those conventions may lead to a certain number of words, but there is no rule that says 15 words, 40 words. Sometimes universities will say, look, we intend to publish your title on your certificate, and of course, if it's too many words, we can't really put it on your certificate, so make it shorter. But outside of that, there is no specific rule that says it should be short. But what there is there are rules that tell you about making sure that in your title you include particular dimensions to give the reader a sense of what they're about to look into. So one of the conventions that is used, and this is one, there may be many others, is one they call PICO, P-I-C-O. So PI means in your title, can you please make sure that your title gives, at least identifies the population you're going to study. So if your study is about children, if your study is about assuming that it is humans, or the P could even be a subject. If you're going to study lakes, you're going to study rivers, then somewhere in your title, the fact that you are intending to do a critical exploration of or a critical analysis of rivers or people or this, it should come out. The intervention becomes the activity that you are likely to be engaging in. Are you engaging in an experimental type of study where you're going to give people a particular intervention and see how it works? Are you just going to analyze a topic? Are you going to carry out an in-depth investigation or whatever? That is the P. So there should be a P, there should be an I. I being the intervention. Are you giving an experiment? Are you observing things? Are you comparing stuff? Are you doing whatever? That is the I. Then the C and the O relates to the control or comparison and the outcome. So somewhere, if you're going to do a study where you're comparing those who've done something versus those who've not, then somewhere in your title there should be some mention of that. And then, of course, if you're interested in doing a study to eventually measure performance in this way or to measure this outcome, the title must also have the outcome. That is the general principle that they consider when people are developing a title. But beyond that, what you are meant to do is use a number of other aids. The first aid is to go to research in your field and see how papers and other things have been titled, and see if you can kind of create a title that resonates with other titles that you see. You also go to the university repository and you find out what titles in your department have looked like, and you try and emulate the same thing. But remember, don't over-invest in the title. We want the elements that you are studying, the population, the subject to be there, the intervention, the outcome that you're interested to be represented there. But as you develop the work, you'll revise it, make it sound much more appropriate. There's also another convention that people use. So when people come from the more art-based subject fields, they tend to use a title that's much more media ready, like more accessible to the reader, more so instead of saying that this is going to carry out a critical analysis of such and such and such, they might just have a title that says exploring the death of media, full stop, a case study or something. That is a different convention, but for the most part, people don't use this latter convention. They use something that's very similar to PICO. This next set of slides is just your contact details, those of your supervisor and all these things. And it's critical that you complete these because they are what we measure. Now, the next thing is with abstract, people are required to present different lengths of abstract. So master's students, it's 150 words. And then for doctoral students, it's 300 words. And with each of those options, you should never exceed 10% more than the given number. So if it's 150 words, you are allowed 10% more, 15 words more, which allows you 165. If it's 300, you're allowed 10% more, which is 330. So that's, and every abstract has very specific, distinct things. So one, your abstract begins with what we call a background, where you give a succinct context of the research problem. So what we're asking you is that you may, if say you are studying, I like to use student success because you're all students and it relates to you and you all want to succeed. So if you were doing a study on student success, maybe your background would be research shows that 1 out of every master's and doctoral students do not complete their studies within the given time. That is the background. That's the background of the problem that you're looking at. Then the next item you deal with is the aim or the purpose of your study. So you can say the proposed study aims to clarify or to offer an investigation of this. You give some information about where it says setting, study population, sample, and methodology. Some people will just have methodology, and you say a mixed method study is proposed, and then you indicate where you're proposing to carry this study out. It's going to be carried out in a hospital, it will be carried out at a mine, and then you indicate that primary data will be collected from participants, n is equal to this, and you state that, and then you indicate the methodology that you will use to collect your data, to analyze your data. Then you finish by indicating what contribution or what significance you perceive your proposed study will have. All this, remember, this is a prospective abstract, so you are writing a summary of a study that is yet to happen. So you will not have results. You cannot include that in your abstract, but that's the, and look, there is no better way of learning how to write an abstract than going to read other abstracts. So every piece of research that you have has got an abstract. The only difference is those abstracts they're writing about studies that have occurred. Yours is looking at a study that is yet to happen. So the final part of your abstract is talking about the contribution you anticipate you make or the significance of your study, and it's not looking at results because you do not have them. However, whatever format of proposal development you work with, there's always an expectation that in the introduction, and each of you will have a section that is an introduction. Sometimes it will say introduction and background. Sometimes it will say background to the research problem. Sometimes it will say introduction and overview. The same, these areas are basically the same. Firstly, the background asks you to give an outline of the research problem. What is it that is the literature is saying about the area you're looking at? What are the issues that continue to be problematic and are not well understood in your field? What is the area of practice that continues to be not well understood? What are the gaps in knowledge? What do the researchers argue about? How long has your problem persevered? How big is the issue? Then at the end, latter part of that introduction, you start to amplify the problem. When I say amplify the problem, some of you who've attended my section on developing aims and objectives, I spoke about something I call problem magnifiers. Problem magnifiers are the sort of things you can use to amplify and make more obvious a research problem. So you use statistics, if there are any, to show how globally problematic your topic is. You use topicality to show how immediate and how current the contexts around your topic are. You use what we call relevance, which may refer to the length of time this issue has been going on, the chronic nature of how the thing you're studying has continued. Not all research problems have these dimensions to play with, but you utilize the dimensions that are relevant to you. The more dimensions you use, the more you substantiate and amplify your problem. So it's critical you do that. Then remember that when you do an introduction and background, you want to end that section with a focus on saying these are the gaps in knowledge. These are the things that continue to be problematic for practitioners, for researchers in this space. And then you stop by indicating which question out of the unanswered ones is the question you are interested in. Because when you stop the introduction and background with that question that you're interested in, you open up a space for the next item. And that item is what we call the statement of the problem or the description of the study problem. And in this space, you are saying, look, this is the generic, in your introduction, you spoke about the generic things that are debated, people struggle with, but now you have come to end with, this is the one of the issues that has not been answered is this issue. Then you now describe that issue as a much more focused problem. So if the issue, then you can show lineage from the background that you looked at existing knowledge. to contemporary practice, then you are able to say, this is the thing that we need to inquire about. Then you explain in greater detail the dimensions of the problem. What is it about this issue that continues to be understood or misunderstood? What is the debate that is there? What are the primary thinkers in the field saying about this? What is the exact nature of thing that we do not understand? So that becomes what the statement of your research problem is, or the description of the study problem. This element, which we've got here as B2, does not last any longer than 3/4 of a page or a page. You are literally just saying, out of that big background I gave you, this is the singular thing that we're focusing on, and I want to build on it. Now, once you have done that, what happens is then people think, okay, we now need to understand from you what principal theories have helped you to understand this topic that you are focusing on. So the next section becomes the theoretical framework. And this theoretical framework should really, they've written it up as a theoretical framework here, but it's easier, it's better understood as the theoretical foundation of your study. So what we are saying now is that, okay, you have said you're going to study student success and you're interested in the role that personality has or something like that, in whether people succeed or not. Then you might have 2 theories that help you to understand that topic better. So you tell us what those theories are, you describe them a little better for us. You then pick out elements of the theories that you think matter. So you can, if you are looking at 4 theories that you think are good principal theories that have helped you to construct your understanding of the problem, from those principal theories, you pick 3 or 4 concepts here and there, and you join them up and you develop and present your conceptual framework. So the conceptual framework will be in this theoretical framing of your study. And remember, the conceptual framework, if you can refer to yesterday's session, is the basis of you saying these are the concepts that matter. These are the things that I will investigate in better detail so I can understand my topic better. So at the end of this theoretical framework section, you are in a position now to actually start to think about your data collection instrument, what it will look like, the items that will be concluded in it. It also gives you a sense of the methodologies that you will engage in. Now, sometimes people have a literature review at this point, but this format is quite unlikely. People don't do this anymore. They ask you in your introduction and background of the study to do a review of the literature at that point as the same thing. But otherwise, sometimes it may come up to here. And really in a literature review, they're saying, look, present to us some key areas of literature that you think are important in us understanding this topic. But that would have probably happened in the introduction. So that the next thing that usually happens after that theoretical framework is people are they then state that the purpose of their study will be this. Then you develop the aim. I have done a session on the developing of the aim and the objectives, and I ask you to read that, to go back to that session and look at it in terms of understanding how you frame your purpose, how you frame research questions, hypotheses, and so forth. So this part I will not get into detail with because it is in itself a whole session, which I did previously, and it's so detailed that to try and do it in this haphazard manner would be incorrect. But with that said, there are some basic points of guidance. Students doing a dissertation of limited scope as part of a master's tend to have 3 and less objectives. Those that are doing a full master's, they can have up to between 3 and 5 objectives, and those doing a PhD tend to do between 5 and 8 objectives. These are not instructions, they are not prescriptions. It's just an observed pattern that over the course of time, those of us who've reviewed thousands and thousands of these get a sense that, oh, usually a doctoral student will have this number of objectives. So I'm giving that to you just as a ballpark figure to help you feel comfortable when you're working on your own objectives, your own questions. So remember, the aim of a study, and I'll say this before I move on, the aim of a study is your terminal knowledge attainment objective. What is it that you want to ultimately understand and find out by the end of your study? That is your aim, that is your purpose. The objectives are, what are the sets of things that you will do, the steps that you will take as you progress to that space of understanding. So some people will start off by saying their first objective is to just get a basic understanding of the concepts that they're studying. The second objective might be to have a sense of what people from different spaces are saying in relation to their question, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And you, this approach, please, folks, go back to my session on developing your research problem, your aim and your objectives, and you will find that you really can ink this well. Now, what happens is with your objectives, each of your objectives tell you what you intend to do. But once you know what you intend to do, you are now in a very good space to be able to say what it is that you need to do to get that. So if, say, you intend to determine the extent of a problem, then it is very clear that, look, you can get that through a survey, for example. Or if you intend to get an in-depth understanding of insider experiences of something, then you think, oh, I will get that through an interview. So what then happens is, if you look at all your objectives, those objectives gives you a very good sense of what your data collection choices that you can choose will be. And once you're clear about your choices, then it also tells you which research paradigm, which world in the research, which form of thinking are you leaning towards? Are you leaning towards a study where all the objectives appear to require qualitative exploration, or do all the objectives need quantitative exploration, or do they need some qualitative, some quantitative? In which case you can now make a decision about whether your study falls in the paradigm of a qualitative study, into a qualitative study, a mixed method study, or quantitative study. What I've done here is I've taken this material that you have in front of you, is from my presentation on how you develop your aim, how you magnify your problem. And basically it says that, look, when you are showing us the problem that you're focusing on, the big thing you have to do is to sell the worst side of your problem so you can show how serious it is, and also to share all the dimensions of the problem. It's a dimension because it affects the world, the continent, your nation, your town that you're in. You can demonstrate another dimension to do with how topical it is, another dimension to talk about its statistical presence. You can even talk about the relevance in the fact that it's been existing for long and continues to be a challenge in that way. So the next thing, of course, is that you move from having this sense of how broad the question has been problematized to developing the objectives. What I've said, this slide here tells you how you differentiate an aim from objectives and questions, and it's fairly straightforward. But as I say, all of this is in my other presentation that I have for you, and it is critical that we look at it. Yesterday, when I taught you about the fact that when you are utilizing theory in a study, you meet it at 3 places, and one of the first places is when you're making decisions about what data collection approach or methodologies you will utilize. That you're basically operating between a number of options. Either it's a quantitative study, so you will be buying into this objectivism, or it's a qualitative study where you're buying into subjectivism, constructionism, interpretivism, which are all part of the qualitative world, or you believe that this is a study where both objectivism and subjectivism have a place to play, and that study becomes centered on the world of pragmatism, i.e. mixed methods research. So all of this is contained in the sessions that I've taught to you. For now, all I'm doing is trying to explain to you where the different things fit in relation to your proposal that you're doing. Then, of course, once you know the things that you're doing and the objectives you've got to go into, you now have to detail your study approach and your design. And I said that your study approach is you really splitting out in detail whether you're going qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods research. That, as I've said, is determined by your objectives, and you deciding that objective 1 will require qualitative inquiry, objective 2 will require this, and at the end, looking at all your 3, 5, 7 objectives and saying, where is this study leaning? Is it half qualitative, half quantitative, or are all the things qualitative, or are all the things quantitative? Whichever one of these results you get tells you whether you have a qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods study. Then the next section that they ask you to do is to talk about your study setting. Where is this going to happen? What's the population that you're studying? What's the sample, and what's the sample size? All of this, by the way, folks, I've taught you. I did a session, I think last week sometime I was asked to do a session on quantitative methodologies, and I spoke to you about the issue of sample size determination. And I said when people write their proposals, they need to state what the population that they are looking at is. Firstly, you tell us what your sampling frame is. Where is the list that you are drawing the detail about your participants or your subjects? Out of that sample frame, what is your population? What is the cases which you are interested in? Is your population students? Then out of that, you indicate which of the students are accessible to you to study. They become what you call an accessible or source population. And then out of that, those who are available for you to look at, then there's a specific group that you're interested in. So you might be out of students studying at a university, you might only be interested in the students that got 24% for a particular exam. They represent your target population. The students that are available to you represent your accessible population. The entire student population is the population. Then the university's list of populations is your sampling frame. But that detail needs to be given in your proposal so people understand and can see in a very detailed way where you plan to go. Remember, the next section is where you detail your data collection methods and your procedure. All that I need to say is that here, the objectives explain, give a sense of what you will use as your methods. Where the critical thing is that all of you are studying things that have been studied in one shape or form, or that have people, predecessors who have studied something similar. So the range of techniques and methods that are available to you are kind of things that have been used by others before you. And what happens with that is that firstly, you get an opportunity to look at how they've described their procedures, how they've described their methodological choices, but also it gives you a sense of what is a common methodology versus one that is uncommon in your field. So if you're studying a particular topic and everyone who has studied that has used interviews, when you give us detail about your data collection methods, you state that you use interviews. You don't have to do much to defend that because it is accepted as the industry norm. However, if you are doing a study where everyone has used interviews, but you have decided through your own interest and other things that you're not going to use interviews, you will collect this using observation. If observation is a different method, very different from what everyone else has used, then there's a much more requirement for you to justify your choice, to compare your choice with other alternatives that were available to you, to explain and defend it. But that is basically what is done. Then what I've attempted to do here, and it doesn't always appear clearly for people, but is to say, look, when you share your data collection method, it's always useful to have a diagrammatic representation. It's always useful that when a reader reads, they can see that the first part of your study will be you reviewing records. Phase 2 may be interviews. Phase 3 might be a survey, and phase 4 will be you doing data analysis and developing theory from that or whatever. So this part was just to say, please, 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 make sure you have a diagrammatic summary of what you intend to do and study in your work. Now, so those are the methodologies. The last, in the empirical phase of your study, people write about the data analysis methods that they do. So at this point, what we are asking you to do is to project forward and say, look, if I'm using qualitative data, and I will have qualitative data, what is the method of analysis that I'm hoping to use? Why am I using that method? What is it about the method that makes it appropriate compared to other options that are available? Of course, if you are doing a mixed method study, then your data analysis method will have two elements to it: the analysis plan for the qualitative data, the analysis plan for the quantitative data. And that you get from just understanding and developing the different methodologies. After you've pointed out your analysis options and where you choose to go, there are some basic additional things that you need to give to explain your study. So the first thing is they always ask you, how do you plan to ensure rigor? What is it that you're going to do to make sure that your study is reliable, is valid, can be trustworthy, is consistent, and so forth? And the different elements of what rigor constitutes are in your textbooks. You'll find that in qualitative research, people will talk about rigor being to do with trustworthiness. And trustworthiness will have components in it. It will have dependability of your materials, how valid what you're looking at, so forth and so forth. Quantitative research, on the other hand, focuses on two basic concepts: validity and reliability. And under B12, you would give an overview of how you aspire to ensure this rigor in your work. If your study is both a mixed method, if it's a mixed method study, then your rigor section will have all the components that qualitative researchers talk about when they're talking about their study being rigorous. And it will also have all the elements that quantitative researchers talk about when they are ensuring rigor for their study. Then now we go on to B13, which is the ethical considerations. Folks, there are textbooks, they are written, and you will have sessions on this. There are written books that speak of very standardized ethical considerations. The fact that in every study, everyone has standardized things to do with ensuring dignity for the participant, assuring them of privacy, assuring them of protection from harm, ensuring that your study causes no harm to them, and so forth. And all of those are book published ethical considerations. You go to any book, it will tell you that ethics has 5 principles. These are all of them. You need to reflect how each of those are going to be taken account of in your study. And we call those generic considerations. But where the game changes is that there are things that people call discipline-specific or domain-specific considerations. discipline specific or domain considerations. Those are the unique ethical issues that exist in your study but may not exist in other studies. So take, for example, when people will, if you're doing a study and you happen to be studying people who maybe report to you at work, you may have to have a special ethical consideration about how you protect the staff and yourself from the appearance of some type of coercion from you. So that consideration is very unique to your study. It's not something that you'll find in every study. You'll only find it in a study where the power differentiation between the data collector and the one from whom data is being collected might affect how the study plays out. So that becomes a domain-specific ethical consideration. Sometimes people will collect data from people that they have the ability to punish, and they'll say, look, I'm interested in knowing how you use your work day. And someone who reports to you thinks, I can't tell them that I hide half the day because of a fear of this and that and that and that. So that becomes an ethical problem in how you manage it, but it's unique just to your study. So when you write ethical considerations, there's two types of them. Generic textbook-based ethical considerations, then they're the ones we call domain-specific considerations. And once that is done, that is essentially the end of the traditional proposal. That once you've got ethical considerations, the end of it. But then there are other things that will get thrown on. Some documents will ask you to complete and detail a risk assessment. In that risk assessment, they ask you very clear questions, which are all quite standard things that you need to answer. The idea being they use that risk assessment to allow you to reach a conclusion at the end of the assessment about what category your study falls in. Is it a study that has minimal risk to participants, low risk, medium risk, or high risk? And of course, this is normally used by universities to make decisions about how substantive and ethical review your study requires. But these latter bits are literally just ticking a box about the truth of what's going on. And all the things that are asked on there are very much matter-of-fact things that you do. The only additional thing I want to state with you around risk assessments is that you have to report every conceivable risk. Don't think that by not reflecting a response, you are making your study better. All you are doing is showing the researcher that you are oblivious to certain things that a good researcher would be able to see. Where you show your strength as a researcher is when you say, look, this is the risk that I see. These are the range of interventions and measures that I have in place to manage that risk. So it is in the absence of risk that makes a study great. It is how you anticipate managing any emerging risks. That's the part that differentiates you. So it's not that there's no danger to see. It's that when you see the danger, you have a way of managing it. And that is ultimately what differentiates a good study from one that is not so properly thought out. The very last item that I want to focus on, and this is a bit tricky because it doesn't come out very well here, and I've always struggled to show it, but it's a very easy concept to talk about. At the very end of your study, you are asked, or at your proposal, you are asked to give a tabulated summary of your research plan. So at the bottom of this slide, you will see that there's something that looks like a table, which tells what activity you are doing, what month you're doing it in. And basically people give an outline, they identify all the major activities that are likely to happen, and then they identify the time estimates for how each one of them will happen. So someone will say they are allocating 4 months to the writing of a proposal, an additional 3 months to the writing of this chapter, 2 months for data collection, and they normally ask that of you in a proposal because they want to understand if you yourself have got a good sense of what the work will look like. Then at the very end, there's a declaration where you declare that you will adhere to all the requirements of ethics as determined by the university, and that you will maintain academic integrity in every way, shape, or form. So that is the story around the issue of that is the story around the issue of proposal developments and proposals that you look at. So with that said, I now am in a position to consider your questions. And if you allow me a moment to just turn on the camera and get on with the Q&A. Okay, there we go. Right, let me just turn this on. Okay, let's see. We have a number of questions. Remember, this is the first of 2 sessions. So tomorrow there may be an opportunity for you to walk through some of the other things, but the basic walkthrough that you require of a proposal is here. 7 p.m. Okay, dead on. Right now we get on to the issue of the questions that you've got. So, hi, Prof. Is it a must to write an abstract for proposal or only for the dissertation or thesis? We always have to have an abstract, always. There's always a requirement for it, because remember, abstracts serve many purposes. One of the purposes that they serve in a department is to give a sense of whether this study is in the right department or not, and whether the person who's allocated to review it is the right person or not. You as the student, of course, have the liberty of first writing the entire proposal and then doing the abstract at the end. But when you submit the document, it must be there. Good evening, Prof. Does the principal investigator in a particular study refer to the researcher? Yes, that principal investigator is you, the researcher, the student, the person to whom we subscribe the conceptualization of the idea and all the key activities that happen in research. What is your take on mixed mode versus multiple mode approaches? So I'm not entirely sure what that question is, but folks, remember, the decision about which methodological option you make is not like going to a shop and deciding which item on the shelf you like. No, this is predicted by the problem you're looking at. So if you're looking at a problem and you're saying, when I want to study it, these are the 5 objectives I have, and you look at each of those objectives, and those objectives can require you to do things that come from the qualitative world and quantitative world, it then tells you it must be a mixed method study. Sometimes the objectives require different types of data collection methods, but all those methods are qualitative. So it might require focus group, an interview, but all of those things are all qualitative things. So in that respect, that's a multi-approach study rather than a mixed method study. But that decision was not a choice I made out of preference. It's a choice that was made to me by the nature of the problem. Is it acceptable to write the introduction and background under one heading or separately? Look, you will be guided by the document you've got in front of you. It is acceptable, but if you get your proposal document template that you're following and it's separated, it should be doable for you to do them separately, but it is acceptable. It is acceptable. Similarly, is it permissible to write a theoretical framework under the same heading as a conceptual framework? Folks, theoretical framework and conceptual frameworks they belong in one world. One is the beginning and one is the end of one process. It's to do with theory development in your study. And I urge you, if you were not at the session yesterday, you cannot survive theoretical contributions and theoretical context without understanding what I taught yesterday, because people get confused, and the only way to unpick that confusion is to have a substantive 1 hour long conversation that focuses on it. And yesterday's session did that. Is it normal that part of the proposal finds itself in the introduction? So when you say part of the proposal, the introduction is the proposal, is part of the proposal. Are you asking whether describing the methodologies is something you do in the introduction of a proposal? And the answer is you shouldn't do it. You should be quite clean about what happens. Folks, you have very limited space in proposals. So departments will tell you that we want a maximum of 250 words in this section or in that section. So you have to make sure that introduction becomes about introduction, background, introduction to the problem, and you leave the issue of methodological choices to the research design element of your study. Is it proper to use theoretical frameworks developed by others at proposal level? Folks, this question here is someone who didn't attend yesterday's session. So the only answer to the question about whether it's proper to use theoretical frameworks developed by others, that must be only cured by someone listening to yesterday's session, because there's quite a lot of, there's a big knowledge gap there that needs to be attended to, and my answer here wouldn't do it. How long should the abstract be? I think I'd put that out. The first two slides tell you, I think I'd said, well, firstly, each proposal document will tell you, but for generic purposes, they usually say 150 for a master's level study, 300 for a doctoral level study. Usually say, but your document will tell you that. Can the same proposal which was approved on admission to do a master's or doctorate be accepted as chapter 1 of a dissertation or thesis? Look, if you write chapter 1 well, there is no way that a proposal could work. If you write a proposal well, there is no way that a proposal could be chapter 1, but they definitely have very substantial similarities. So people take a very substantial chunk of their proposal to use in chapter 1, as long as it's in the same study process is understood, but one is not the other. Chapter 1 is not a proposal is not chapter 1, but they have many, many substantial similarities. Can you cite theory in your introduction? Yes, of course. You can. You can cite theory in your introduction, absolutely. But remember, the basis of a problem is usually observations made by research, where research has failed to answer things. So theory must exist, but your conclusion that we continue to struggle with this area can only be reached if you're saying, look at recent researchers who continue to be unable to answer this question. So theory becomes a small part, but previous research becomes the most significant part. How do we access a model proposal that satisfies UNISA standard? So folks, we do, well, that's the best way. So many students publish their proposals online. You can look there. Many departments have examples. Many supervisors have examples. You request them. But the general view is that we don't want, a proposal is very different for each student. And once you give students a proposal to trace or to use as a blueprint, they limit their ability to think. So the generic view is that we will give you proposal guidance, but we don't want to give you a proposal, because unfortunately students have continued to disappoint by copying what they think is there. Evening, Prof. Where can we get the lecture you did yesterday? I think there is a link that's been given to you a couple of times on where you can access the recordings. and the PowerPoint slides that's been given to you at 6:48 today on the chat. Yes, yeah. So, folks, I think those are the questions that stand out for us for this evening. As I say, this is stage 1. Stage 2 will part 2 will be presented to you by Professor Johnston tomorrow. So many of the things that you think you need to revisit, you have an opportunity to look at. And as I say with research, you never meet something once and get it. I probably attended 20 proposal development sessions before I had it, and 20 sessions from 20 different people. And it allowed me to develop my own type of sense about what a proposal looks like. So there is no shortcut to dealing with hard things. And the efficient way is to understand your content very well. So all you are struggling with is how you articulate your problem, but the process is quite clear to you, and that's what you need to work on. So with that, okay, in referencing the author in an article, how not to repeat after what you're referencing in order to avoid plagiarism. I'm not sure I understand that question. I think there's a typo there. I'm trying to make sense of it. Fatih, I can't seem to understand it. And what I suggest is that maybe you rephrase or retype the question in the lifetime of my goodbye, or reword it and then present it at the beginning of tomorrow's session. It's very similar, but if the question is about referencing and academic integrity and avoiding plagiarism, we do have sessions specifically on that, and that will be coming up soon. Yeah, if it's not, I think it's actually presented in the first 3 weeks of the project. But if you go to our previous slides, and if you join our academic integrity open online course that we have, it details and deals with all these issues. On that note, it's 7:11 p.m. in South Africa. I want to thank you all for attending this session, and I look forward to you joining us tomorrow, same time, same place, for part 2 of proposal development. Thank you, everyone. Good night.